The grand halls of the palace were bathed in moonlight, their gilded columns and shimmering tapestries casting an air of timeless splendor. Yet for Princess Helena, this was no sanctuary. It was a cage. Her footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor as she moved through the shadows, clutching a small bundle to her chest. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, heavier than the crown she was born to wear. Tonight, she would abandon it all. The palace, her title, her father's kingdom. The luxuries that had once defined her life now felt hollow against the fire that burned in her heart. Love had kindled that fire, a love forbidden and yet undeniable. In Aidan's arms, she had glimpsed a freedom that no gilded throne could offer. But freedom came at a price. Helena paused at the edge of the royal gardens, the scent of roses carried on the night breeze. Her gaze lingered on the spires of the castle towering above, a silhouette of duty and tradition that had shaped her existence. Her father's words rang in her ears, words of alliances and sacrifice. To stay meant surrendering her soul. To leave meant betraying the only life she had ever known. A faint rustling broke her thoughts. Aidan stepped out from the shadows, his face illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. His presence was steady, a stark contrast to the storm within her. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his voice a balm to her unrest. Helena took a shaky breath. "No," she admitted, "but I must go." The words tasted foreign yet freeing. She slipped her hand into Aidan's, and together they moved through the gardens, the world beyond the gate looming like an abyss. Each step was a battle between fear and hope, the unknown pulling at her heart like a tide. Within the castle, the distant chime of the hour bell echoed. Helena froze momentarily, clutching Aidan's arm, her pulse quickening. Beyond those walls, her father slept, oblivious to the betrayal that would fracture his world by dawn. Her gaze drifted one last time toward the towers of the palace. She whispered to herself, "I will not be a prisoner anymore." And so, they slipped into the night. As they crossed the threshold of the palace gates, the burdens of her royal life fell away. Yet with every step into the unknown, Helena felt the weight of the choice she had made. The garden's whispers seemed to follow her, haunting her thoughts as the spires of the castle disappeared behind them. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Princess Helena was no more. She was simply Helena, a woman chasing freedom. But even as the road stretched endlessly before her, the memories of moonlit halls and her father's decree lingered like shadows on her soul. That morning, she would face Aidan once more in the royal gardens, clutching a letter in her trembling hands, the decree that had sealed her fate. Her footsteps led her to the familiar quiet of their meeting place, the weight of her choice settling heavier with each step. "You cannot marry him," Aidan's voice echoed, resolute as ever. Her answer, though heavy with doubt, had already begun to shape the story that would change not only her life, but the fate of the kingdom itself. The kingdom of Eldoria basked in the golden glow of a late spring morning, the air carrying the scent of blooming roses from the royal gardens. Within the grand halls of the castle, however, tension loomed heavy. Princess Helena, adorned in a gown of emerald silk, sat in her chambers, her heart weighed down by a letter resting in her hands. It bore the seal of her father, King Edmundo, and within it, her future had been decreed. "You are to marry Duke Lionel of Varathia," the letter read, its words as cold and unyielding as the northern winds. "This union shall fortify our alliance and secure peace for the realm." Helena's fingers tightened around the parchment as tears threatened to spill. Lionel was a man of power and renown, but his reputation as a ruthless and calculating noble chilled her. She had heard tales of his cruelty, whispers of villages laid bare to fuel his conquests. To marry him was to shackle herself to a life of subservience, far removed from the freedom she craved. Her gaze shifted to the gardens below, where she often found solace. Among the maze of hedges and fountains stood Aidan, a young campones she had known since childhood. He was tending to the roses, his hands moving with care as he trimmed their thorns. Aidan's presence was a reminder of simpler times when they would laugh and share dreams beneath the stars. A sudden knock at her door jolted her from her reverie. "Helena, may I enter?" came the voice of her father, regal and commanding. She straightened her posture and quickly hid the letter. "Enter, father." The king stepped inside, his presence filling the room. Clad in a tunic of deep crimson and gold, Edmundo was every bit the image of a sovereign. Yet his eyes, lined with age and worry, softened as they met hers. "Helena," he began, his tone measured. "You understand the importance of this marriage, do you not?" "Father," she replied, struggling to maintain composure, "must my happiness be the cost of peace?" Edmundo sighed heavily, moving to sit beside her. "A ruler's duty is seldom easy. I do not take joy in this arrangement, but the safety of Eldoria must come first. Varathia's armies are vast, and Lionel's loyalty is the key to securing our borders." Her voice trembled. "And what of my heart? What of love?" "Love," he said, with a touch of sorrow, "is a luxury we cannot afford in these times." Helena bit back her response, knowing further argument would be in vain. As her father rose to leave, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you know. Trust in the wisdom of this decision." When he left, the room felt colder, the walls pressing in on her. That night, unable to sleep, Helena wandered to the gardens. She found Aidan there, the moonlight casting a silver glow upon him. He turned at her approach, his brown eyes warm and steady. "My lady," he greeted with a bow, though his smile hinted at the ease of their old friendship. "What troubles you at this hour?" Helena hesitated, but the words poured out as if a dam had broken. She told him of the impending marriage, of the despair gnawing at her soul. "You cannot marry him," Aidan said, his voice firm. "You deserve a life of love and freedom, not chains of duty." "What choice do I have?" she whispered, tears brimming. "I am but a pawn in this game of kings and dukes." "You have a choice," he said, stepping closer. "Come with me. Leave this castle and its burdens behind. We could live simply, away from politics and war." Her heart ached at his words, torn between the life she was born into and the life she yearned for. "If I leave," she said, "I betray my father and my kingdom. If I stay, I betray myself." "Helena," he said softly, taking her hands in his, "a kingdom is nothing without its people. And you are a person before you are a princess." His touch was a balm to her troubled heart. Yet doubt lingered. Could she truly abandon her duty? Could she forsake the people of Eldoria, who depended on her father's rule? "I need time," she said at last, pulling her hands away. "To think, to decide." Aidan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Whatever you choose, know that I will stand by you." As she returned to her chambers, her mind churned with conflicting emotions. The weight of expectation clashed with the stirrings of her heart, leaving her restless as the dawn approached. The gardens seemed to whisper to her through the night, urging her to choose a path before it was too late. Helena stood at a crossroads, her decision poised to alter the fate of not only her own life, but that of an entire kingdom. The question loomed. Would she sacrifice herself for duty, or would she grasp the chance at a life of love, no matter the cost? The answer, she knew, would come with the rising sun. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon as Helena stood at the edge of the royal gardens, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The castle loomed behind her, its tall spires dark against the faint glow. She clutched a small bundle of belongings, simple garments, a loaf of bread, and a single keepsake from her mother, a silver locket engraved with the royal crest. Every step away from the castle felt like tearing a thread from the tapestry of her life. Aidan waited by the garden gate, a satchel slung over his shoulder. His clothes, though plain and well-worn, carried the resilience of a man accustomed to hard labor. His face was a mixture of relief and concern as Helena approached. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his voice low yet steady. Helena hesitated, her gaze drifting back toward the castle. The weight of her father's words echoed in her mind, but so too did the memory of Aidan's warmth. "I am," she replied, though her voice wavered. "This life, I cannot endure it anymore." Without another word, they slipped through the gate, their footsteps soft against the dewy grass. The path ahead was uncharted, fraught with uncertainty, yet it was hers to take. As the castle receded behind them, Helena felt the first stirrings of both fear and freedom. The road to the distant village of Evershade was long and winding, flanked by dense forests that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Helena, unaccustomed to such a journey, struggled to keep pace. Thorns snagged her dress, and the cold seeped through her thin cloak. Aidan, noticing her exhaustion, offered to carry her bundle. "You're not used to this, are you?" he asked gently. She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "My life has been one of banquets and silks, not brambles and dirt." "Then we'll take it slow," he said, his tone reassuring. "We've all the time in the world now." By the time they reached Evershade, night had fallen, and the village lay cloaked in shadows. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint sound of laughter drifted from the tavern. Aidan led Helena to a modest cottage at the village's edge, its thatched roof sagging slightly with age. "It's not much," he said, pushing open the creaky wooden door. "But it's warm, and it's safe." Inside, the cottage was humble but welcoming. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the simple furnishings. A small table, 2 chairs, and a straw-stuffed mattress comprised the entirety of the space. Helena sank onto the mattress, her body aching from the journey. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alone. No attendants to draw her bath, no maids to brush her hair. Yet as Aidan handed her a bowl of broth he had prepared, she realized there was comfort in the simplicity. The days that followed were a test of endurance. Helena awoke before sunrise to help Aidan tend the fields, her hands blistered from wielding tools she had never before touched. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her fine skin, once shielded from the elements, grew rough and tanned. She learned to bake bread, to mend clothes, and to haul water from the well. Her royal upbringing offered little preparation for such tasks, but she persevered, spurred by Aidan's patient guidance and her own determination. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Aidan spoke. "You've adapted well. I didn't think you'd last a week." Helena laughed, though her muscles ached from the day's labor. "Neither did I, but there's a strange satisfaction in it. For the first time I feel useful." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. Aidan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it? Leaving the castle?" She met his gaze, her voice firm. "No. The freedom to choose my own path is worth more than all the gold in Eldoria." But even as she spoke, the shadow of doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. She missed her father, her friends, the familiarity of the castle. Yet she knew returning was no longer an option. Their quiet life was disrupted one fateful morning. Helena was gathering firewood at the edge of the forest when she spotted a figure on horseback approaching the village. The rider was clad in the colors of Eldoria, the royal sigil emblazoned on his tunic. Her heart raced as she ducked behind a tree, her breath catching in her throat. The rider dismounted at the center of the village, his booming voice carrying over the chatter of the villagers. "By decree of King Edmundo, all loyal subjects are commanded to report any sightings of Princess Helena. She is believed to have been taken against her will and is to be returned to the castle immediately." Helena's blood ran cold. Her father's men were searching for her. She knew what this meant. Her absence had not gone unnoticed, and the king would stop at nothing to bring her back. She hurried back to the cottage, where Aidan was chopping wood. "Aidan," she said breathlessly, "they're looking for me. The king's men are here." He paused, his axe frozen mid-swing. "We'll leave. Tonight." "No," she said, her voice trembling. "If we run, they'll hunt us down. We'll bring danger to the village." "Then what do we do?" he asked, his brows furrowed in worry. Helena took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We stay hidden. For now." That night, as they lay in the darkened cottage, Helena could not sleep. The walls felt closer than ever, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The freedom she had tasted now seemed fragile, threatened by the looming specter of her father's decree. For the first time since leaving the castle, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Weeks turned into months as Helena and Aidan kept their lives hidden in every shade. The tension of living in obscurity gnawed at her, but she found moments of peace in the rhythm of their humble existence. She had grown stronger, her hands calloused from the fields and her spirit steeled by adversity. Yet the shadow of her father's soldiers lingered, a constant reminder of the world she had left behind. One brisk autumn morning, the sound of distant hoofbeats shattered the stillness. Aidan was outside splitting wood when he froze, his axe poised mid-swing. Helena rushed to the window, her heart racing as she spotted a column of armored men riding toward the village. At their head was a standard bearing the sigil of Eldoria. "They've found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Aidan said, stepping into the cottage and barring the door. "They wouldn't march an entire unit for us. Something else is happening." The soldiers entered the village square, their banners fluttering in the wind. The villagers gathered cautiously, murmuring among themselves. Helena and Aidan slipped into the growing crowd, keeping their heads low. The commander dismounted, his voice carrying a tone of urgency. "By decree of King Edmundo, all able-bodied men and women are called to defend the kingdom," he announced. "The armies of Varathia march on Eldoria. Every sword, every shield, every life is needed." A murmur spread through the crowd, and Helena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Varathia, the very kingdom she was meant to ally with through marriage, had turned against Eldoria. Her choice to flee had not only failed to secure peace, but now threatened to plunge her homeland into chaos. The commander continued, "Our forces are gathering in the northern plains. Those who wish to join us will be provided weapons and rations. Eldoria needs you." Helena glanced at Aidan, whose expression was unreadable. His jaw tightened as he watched the villagers murmur their agreements. He turned to her. "We have to leave," he said, his voice low. "If the soldiers recognize you—" But before he could finish, a cry rang out from the far edge of the village. A cloud of dust billowed as figures on horseback galloped toward them. Varathian raiders. Their armor was dark and menacing, their swords flashing as they charged. "Take cover," the commander bellowed, drawing his blade. Chaos erupted as villagers scattered, some running for their homes, others grabbing farming tools to defend themselves. Helena and Aidan ducked behind a cart as arrows whistled through the air. "Aidan," Helena cried, her heart pounding. "We have to help them." He hesitated, his face a mixture of fear and resolve. "Stay here," he said, grabbing a pitchfork and charging into the fray. Helena watched in horror as the battle unfolded. The villagers fought valiantly, but they were no match for the trained raiders. Blood stained the dirt as screams filled the air. She felt paralyzed, torn between self-preservation and the overwhelming urge to aid her people. Aidan clashed with one of the raiders, managing to disarm him with a deft maneuver. But as he turned, another attacker struck him from behind. He fell to the ground with a cry, clutching his side. "No!" Helena screamed, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding. "You're going to be all right," she whispered, though tears blurred her vision. The commander and his soldiers finally managed to drive off the raiders, but the village lay in ruins. Fires crackled in the distance, and the air was thick with smoke and despair. The commander approached Helena and Aidan, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. "You," he said, his tone sharp. "You look familiar." Helena stiffened, her mind racing for an explanation. But before she could speak, an elderly woman stepped forward. It was Hilda, one of the village's oldest residents. "She is no one of importance," Hilda said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just a healer's apprentice." The commander studied Helena for a moment longer before nodding. "You have skill," he said. "We could use someone like you at the front lines." Helena's heart sank. She had spent months hiding, avoiding the responsibilities of her station. But as she looked around at the broken village and the wounded faces of her people, guilt gnawed at her. These were her people, her father's subjects. Could she truly stand by and do nothing? "I'll go," she said before she could stop herself. Aidan's hand shot out, gripping hers weakly. "No," he rasped, his face pale from blood loss. "Don't. You've already sacrificed so much." She met his gaze, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't stay here and watch them suffer. This is my chance to make things right." The commander nodded, gesturing for her to follow. "We leave at dawn." Helena spent the night by Aidan's side, tending to his wound as best she could. His breathing was shallow, his strength waning. She felt as though her heart was being torn in two. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "I do," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "For you, for them, for Eldoria." As the first light of dawn broke, Helena kissed Aidan's forehead and whispered a promise. "I will return. I swear it." She joined the soldiers as they marched from the village, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her. She had chosen her people over her heart, but as the sound of Aidan's labored breaths faded into the distance, she wondered if she had made the ultimate sacrifice. Helena's arrival at the war camp on the northern plains was met with wary glances and hushed murmurs. Soldiers clad in battered armor moved purposefully among rows of tents, their faces hardened by fatigue and loss. Fires crackled in the cool night air, casting flickering shadows over the makeshift encampment. She clutched the coarse fabric of her borrowed cloak tightly, trying to steel herself against the overwhelming sight. The commander led her through the camp, his tone clipped and impersonal. "You'll be assigned to the healer's tent," he said. "We need every able hand. But know this, if you step out of line, there will be consequences." Helena nodded silently, her resolve unshaken. She was here to make amends, to contribute to the defense of Eldoria in any way she could. But as the hours turned into days, she found herself grappling with the stark realities of war. The healer's tent was a place of unrelenting sorrow, filled with the groans of the wounded and the acrid smell of blood and herbs. Helena worked tirelessly, cleaning wounds, stitching gashes, and offering what little comfort she could to the dying. Yet her heart remained tethered to Aidan. Every moment away from him felt like a betrayal of the promise she had made. At night, when the camp grew quiet, she would sit alone by the fire, clutching the silver locket around her neck and whispering his name into the darkness. One evening, as she was tending to a young soldier with a mangled leg, the tent flap was pushed aside. A familiar figure entered, his presence commanding yet weathered. It was King Edmundo. He wore a suit of dark armor adorned with the royal crest, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. Helena's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. "Helena," he said softly, his voice heavy with emotion. "I feared I would never see you again." She straightened, her hands trembling slightly. "Father," she replied, her tone guarded. "Why are you here?" Edmundo stepped closer, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I came to see the state of my people and to bring you home." "I cannot leave," she said firmly. "My place is here. Your place is beside your family," he countered, his voice rising. "Do you not see what your absence has cost us? The alliance with Varathia has crumbled. Their betrayal is a direct result of your refusal to marry Lionel." Helena flinched at his words, but held her ground. "You have me sacrifice my life, my freedom, for a man I despise? And for what? To delay a war that would have come regardless." Edmundo's shoulders sagged, the weight of his crown evident in his posture. I only wanted to protect you, to protect Eldoria. But now, I see that I failed you." The raw vulnerability in his voice caught Helena off guard. She had always seen her father as unyielding, a figure of authority who placed duty above all else. Yet here he stood, a man burdened by regret. "I made my choice," she said gently, "and I will face the consequences. But I am no longer the girl who left the castle. I am stronger now. I can fight for our people." Edmundo studied her, a flicker of pride breaking through his sorrow. "If you are willing to fight," he said, "then I must ask more of you." Helena's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "The nobles will not support our efforts unless the throne is secure," he explained. "They demand that you marry Lionel to ensure their allegiance. Without them, our forces will be outnumbered and outmatched." The words hit her like a blow. She had come to the camp seeking redemption, but now she was faced with a choice that would shatter her resolve. To marry Lionel was to forsake her love for Aidan, to chain herself to a life of misery for the sake of the realm. "I cannot," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "Father, please." "You must," he insisted, his voice breaking. "This war will not be won with swords alone. Sacrifices must be made." Helena turned away, her mind racing. Could she truly give up Aidan, the man who had shown her what it meant to be free? Could she tether herself to Lionel, a man whose ambition knew no bounds? The faces of the wounded soldiers flashed in her mind, their pain a stark reminder of the cost of inaction. That night, as the camp prepared for another battle, Helena stood alone at the edge of the plains. The stars above seemed cold and distant, offering no solace. She thought of Aidan, his laughter, his touch, and the promise she had made to him. But she also thought of the villagers who had suffered, the kingdom that hung in the balance. When the dawn broke, she made her decision. The camp buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for the march. Helena approached her father, her expression resolute. "I will marry Lionel," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "But only after the battle is won. I will fight alongside our people and prove that I am more than a pawn." Edmundo nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You are braver than I ever imagined." As the army marched toward the battlefield, Helena donned a suit of light armor, her royal crest hidden beneath a plain tunic. The weight of her choice bore down on her, but she walked with her head high. She would fight not as a princess, but as one of the people. The battlefield stretched before them, a sea of chaos and bloodshed. Helena fought with a ferocity that surprised even herself, her blade cutting through the enemy ranks. But as the sun set on the carnage, a messenger arrived with devastating news. Aidan had been found in Evershade, his body broken but his spirit unyielding. He had defended the village from another raid, buying time for its people to flee. His sacrifice had cost him his life. Helena fell to her knees, the weight of grief threatening to crush her. Yet she rose, her resolve hardening. Aidan's death would not be in vain. She would see this war to its end, no matter the cost. The day after the battle dawned gray and somber, the plains shrouded in a heavy mist that clung to the earth like the lingering specter of death. The soldiers moved silently through the remnants of the battlefield, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Helena stood apart from them, her armor smeared with dirt and blood, her heart an empty void. Aidan's sacrifice weighed on her like an anchor, dragging her deeper into the sea of sorrow. She had chosen her people over her love, but the price had been far greater than she ever imagined. The camp bustled as the army regrouped, preparing for the march back to Eldoria. Victory had been achieved, though at a staggering cost. Thousands lay dead, their lives given to halt Varathia's advance. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and decay, a grim reminder of the kingdom's fragile hold on peace. Helena sat alone near the edge of the camp, her hands trembling as she turned the silver locket over in her palm. It no longer felt like a token of hope, but a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Aidan's laughter echoed in her mind, his voice urging her to hold on, to be brave. She closed her eyes, willing the tears to stop, but they fell freely, streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "Princess Helena," a voice called softly, breaking her reverie. She turned to see Lionel approaching, his polished armor gleaming even in the dim light. His expression was uncharacteristically somber, though his eyes held their usual sharpness. "Duke Lionel," she replied, rising to her feet. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "You fought well," he said, his tone measured. "Your presence inspired the men. It seems there is more steel in you than I anticipated." Helena met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Steel alone is not enough to mend a broken kingdom." Lionel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Perhaps not, but steel can build a foundation upon which we can rebuild. And we must rebuild quickly. Our marriage will bring the stability Eldoria needs." The words struck her like a blade. She had made her promise, but now, standing in the aftermath of so much loss, the thought of binding herself to Lionel felt unbearable. She had fought for her people, bled for them, and still it did not feel like enough. Was this truly the life she was meant to live? That evening, as the army prepared to depart, King Edmundo summoned her to his tent. The flickering firelight cast shadows over his face, deepening the lines of worry and regret. "Helena," he began, his voice heavy, "your sacrifice has saved Eldoria. The nobles are prepared to support us, and Varathia's forces are retreating. But the cost," his voice faltered. "I wish I could take this burden from you." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Father, I need to ask you something. Do you believe that peace can be forged through forced alliances? Through sacrifices that leave nothing of ourselves behind?" Edmundo sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I believed it once, but seeing you here, seeing what you've endured, I am no longer certain." "Then why must I marry Lionel?" she pressed, her voice trembling with desperation. "There must be another way." The king was silent for a long moment, his expression conflicted. Finally he spoke. "If you choose to break this alliance, you must be prepared to lead the kingdom alone. The nobles will challenge you, the alliances will falter, and the road will be perilous. But if you are certain I will not stand in your way." Helena's heart surged with a mixture of fear and determination. The path before her was treacherous, but she could no longer betray her own soul. She had lost Aidan, but she would not lose herself. The following morning, the camp gathered for the march back to Eldoria. Soldiers and nobles alike turned to watch as Helena stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the field. "I have fought alongside you, bled with you, and mourned with you," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I made a promise to fight for our people, to protect this kingdom, and I will keep that promise. But I will not forge peace through a union that betrays who I am." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but she continued, her voice unwavering. "I will lead Eldoria as your princess and as your defender. Together, we will rebuild this kingdom not through fear, but through unity and justice." Lionel stepped forward, his expression darkening. "You would cast aside our alliance? Risk the stability of your throne for your pride?" Helena met his glare with calm resolve. "This is not about pride, but about honor. I will not trade one form of tyranny for another." The murmurs grew louder, but Edmundo raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "My daughter speaks the truth," he declared. "She has proven her strength, her courage, and her love for this kingdom. If she is willing to lead, I will stand beside her." The declaration sent a wave of uncertainty through the nobles, but slowly, one by one, they nodded in reluctant agreement. Helena felt a flicker of hope as the crowd dispersed, though the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. The return to Eldoria was both triumphant and somber. As the castle gates came into view, Helena's thoughts drifted to Aidan. She imagined him standing in the gardens, his hands stained with the roses he had cared for so tenderly. The ache in her chest was a constant reminder of his absence, but she vowed to honor his memory by building a better kingdom. In the months that followed, Helena proved herself a capable and compassionate leader. She worked tirelessly to rebuild the villages ravaged by war, forging alliances based on mutual respect rather than coercion. The nobles, though hesitant at first, grew to admire her determination. But in the quiet moments, when the halls of the castle fell silent, she would walk alone in the gardens, the silver locket clutched in her hand. She spoke to Aidan in those moments, her voice soft and filled with longing. "I hope you're proud," she would whisper. "I hope you see what we've built." And though the ache of loss never truly left her, she found solace in the knowledge that she had chosen a path not of duty alone, but of love, for her people, for her kingdom, and for the memory of the man who had shown her the meaning of freedom.